want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
I want to talk about Jos Verstappen and the constant hate he's getting on social media. Pierre Gasly talked about something he'd seen in his karting days, and this started the debate up again whether Jos abused his son Max or not. I want to reveal the truth about Jos and what he has done to and for his son. Be prepared, as it might not be what you expect from a video about the current Formula 1 World Champion's father. I'm Wimbo. Here's 3 seconds to leave a like. So, we all know the stories about Jos Verstappen and his cruel tutelage of his son Max. The stories of Max driving in the cold while everyone was snug inside, the slaps around the helmet, and the angry outbursts are widely known. The infamous petrol station story gets repeated all the time, and in the book Unstoppable by Mark Hughes, there's a story where Max had to walk to the hotel, and when he received the lift home, he was brought back to the spot where he was picked up and had to finish the walk. Pierre Gasly recently spoke on a podcast about the constant pressure in motorsport. He recalled a situation where young Max finished second and Jos was yelling and cursing, which upset his son. Now I agree that seeing something like that from the outside is never pretty. I saw a mother pull up a child from the floor in the supermarket by his ear once, because that kid was throwing a tantrum for nothing and it looked awful. I did feel for the mother though, as she had a toddler in the seat of her trolley and she looked overwhelmed and panicked. My kids were that age 15 years ago, but I do remember them being dicks like that very well. So I didn't judge that lady, even if her method wasn't educationally correct according to the experts on social media. So let's bring this situation back to Jos. You'd think that he wasn't under pressure standing at the side of a track coaching his son, that there was no need to shout at his boy like that. What people forget is that when Jos Verstappen quit F1 after 2003, he was still young enough to have a career in motorsport. He's in rally racing right now and he's winning races. But he chose a different path. He saw the talent Max had and he noticed how badly he wanted to race and win. So they made a deal. Jos was letting his own career go to help his son to be successful. One could say that Jos had a failed career. I personally think that 10 years in F1 isn't a failure at all. But other people might feel differently about that. He did only manage to race for back markers and he didn't finish many races. But there were reasons for that. He knew those reasons all too well from his own experiences. And he made a promise to do everything in his power to prevent Max having to go through the same problems. The first problem Jos encountered was being a second driver to the legendary Michael Schumacher. Those two were friends off the track, but on track, Schumacher and his dominance didn't do his Dutch buddy any favors. Jos was forced to drive a car which Schumacher set up in case Schumacher needed his car. This made it very hard for Jos to drive well at Benetton, as he had a different driving style and preferred the car to be totally different. So Max Verstappen was instructed from a very young age to never be a second driver. Because if you get into those situations, you might make a teammate stronger and yourself look weaker. Max understood this very well and didn't let Sainz through in Singapore in his debut season. He was only 17 years old, but he didn't care about the aftermath. He dealt with that later, and in the meantime, he was happy where he finished. I credit Jos for this attitude. The second problem Jos Verstappen had was due to his poor performances at Benetton. He couldn't find a seat in a decent team and was stuck in these small, sometimes promising teams. He showed great promise at Simtech, with crazy starts and amazing quali laps. But unfortunately, this team went bankrupt. The Honda team that almost happened would have been great for Jos too, but Honda decided to be an engine supplier rather than a full F1 race team, so that dream didn't come true either. So Jos Verstappen and his manager Raymond Vermeulen oversaw that Max went to a strong team with potential. Red Bull offered him a seat straight away, and so they left Mercedes hanging. You can be sure that behind the scenes, Jos and Raymond were putting pressure on Renault to supply better engines during Max's early Red Bull days. And when they saw the opportunity to get Honda on board, they pushed for that like mad. We know how that worked out. And I give Jos Verstappen some credit for that too. Now let's go back to the karting days. Jos had given up his career to train and finance his son. This was incredibly expensive. I hear Max haters say that he was brought up with a silver spoon. But that's an absolute falsehood. Jos Verstappen made good money as an F1 driver. but not the amounts that Stroll Sr. or Norris Sr. have at their disposal with their businesses. I would estimate that Jos came away from F1 barely a millionaire, and by the time Max was forced to join a karting team to help with the expenses, Jos had only some real estate left. He sunk hundreds of thousands of euros of his savings in his boy's karting career. That's why I hate it when stupid people say, Jos needs to go, he only wants to ride on his son's back, he's only causing trouble. If there's anyone in the paddock who has the right to be near Max Verstappen, it's his father. Don't let some silly girl sharing paparazzi photos on their shitty Instagram, gaining tens of thousands of followers on the back of Verstappen, tell you otherwise. If anything, they should f*** off. I hate gatekeeping, but the sport can do without that particular group. Editing out Kelly on photos she posted. It's sick. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, the money. So obviously Jos Verstappen felt the pressure of having invested so much in his kid. This made Jos extra grumpy, no doubt, and it brought out the worst in him at times. I'm not afraid to admit that. I'm sure that if Jos had a different upbringing and a better education, he would have handled things better. What I just said goes for me as well. My teenagers could probably tell you a few stories that would break your heart too. And I could tell you things about my parents and the way I was brought up too. If I share those stories with friends, they laugh. And they share their stories about their upbringing and their kids. If you're honest, there are stories you can tell as well, but you'd rather not have them out in public. Do you know how hard it is to get through to teenagers? My eldest failed his exams last year, and maybe we didn't push him hard enough. I didn't have a ton of money resting on his diploma, so maybe that's why I'm so relaxed about it. But I did pay 2,500 euros for his driving lessons last week. I can promise you that if he slacks and makes a mess out of it, there will be words. But nobody outside of our family will know about it. The Jos and Max stories are out in public, so Jos gets judged. I dare you to share in the comments the worst story you can think of about your parents, and I'll rate how bad it is. I asked someone on Twitter the same question, but she declined. The irony of this whole I hate Jos for what he did to Max narrative is that all of you are fans because he's a winner. You're a fan because of what he showed from age 17 on the grid. You didn't show Nick de Vries the same love, or Nicholas Latifi, who probably have really nice fathers. You can't have it both ways. The methods Jos used were there to make Max snap out of that state teenagers get into sometimes. He prepared him for the reality that having talent wasn't enough to make it in F1. He prevented him from getting complacent after winning all the kart races, thinking it was enough to just show up. See, Jos is from a relatively poor background, and he had his own fair share of problems with his own father Franz. Same as me, he's from Generation X. My generation was brought up with lots of freedom, but also in a very harsh way. If I came home and I told my dad that I got kicked around the school by the headmaster, which did happen, he'd ask why, and I'd probably get a few more kicks. We went on summer camps and we were dropped in a forest to find our way back to the camp, with just flashlights and a map we sneakily took with us in our boots. I'm not saying it's right, but getting shouted at or getting a slap was nothing unusual. Jos did to Max what his father did to him, and I'm not saying it's right, but to paint him like a psychopathic villain also isn't right. You can't judge him like that without crediting for everything that he did right. Many people wished they had a father who was involved like Jos was. He didn't go out for milk and never came back. I'd like to point out what it did for Max and his mentality. When Ricciardo and Verstappen got shouted at by Helmut Marko after the Baku 2018 incident, Daniel was so upset he left the team, whereas Max just shrugged it off and laughed because he'd been shouted at way worse. The immense pressure of the 2021 season, with all the bad luck and the British media putting pressure on him, wasn't seen in his results. He kept giving it everything, as seen in that quali lap in Jeddah, and he didn't lose any extra points in the final races with a slower car than Hamilton. That spirit of never giving up was hammered into his system by the training he received from Jos. And you can tell that other drivers sometimes lack this conviction. So I credit Jos for the toughness we all enjoy in Max Verstappen. You, watching this video, might be brought up with soft-speaking helicopter parents who made your life as comfortable as possible. But don't judge others that didn't have this luxury. Our upbringing was tough, and so was Max's, and we see the results of that every single season. And Max is unbothered by it too. He has fond memories of driving from the Netherlands to Italy for days and playing Green Green Grass of Home in the van. This unjustified outrage only serves to gain clout on social media. This brings us to today's situation at Red Bull. Jos Verstappen warned that if Horner stayed, a lot of good people would leave. And that happened. Newey, Wheatley and Courtney are three pillars of Red Bull's success, and they will all be gone. Some people blame Jos for this unrest, but I'd like to explain a few things about that. For years we heard very little from Jos in the media about what happened with Max at Red Bull. There was a situation that needed some explanation after Monaco 2022 when Checo parked the car during quali and Max had to start in P4. Red Bull also pitted Checo before Max during the race, and Jos took to the Max Verstappen fan page and explained what he, Raymond and Max didn't like about that decision. I include Max in this because his father doesn't do anything without Max's approval. Those three are a unit and we see that all the time. Max admits that he can't do it without them, nor does he want to. Jos popped up again this season when it looked like Helmut Marko was about to be sacked. Their loyalty lies with Helmut Marko, and Jos said all the things Max couldn't, and even if the things Jos said sound grotesque and evil to you, he did it to honor Helmut Marko. The Verstappens have a code to have loyalty to the people they hold in high regard. This is something unique in F1, and that's why it's not understood. It's that same honor and loyalty that still keeps Max Verstappen at Red Bull, even when things don't go the way they should. He could have signed for Mercedes 10 times already, with Toto Wolff being so keen to sign him. I believe Max when he says he wants to honor his contract, as long as they honor his wishes too. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that if things go back to normal at Red Bull and things quiet down and the results are back, then Jos Verstappen won't be hurt anymore. There won't be a need for him to speak out on things in the media. If Jos comes out with stuff again, it's not him stirring things up, it's to point out things that are already not right at Red Bull. After everything Jos Verstappen has done for his son, it doesn't make sense for him to throw this team over just for the fun of it, or for personal reasons. He wants Max to keep winning and even be more successful, and he doesn't mind playing the bad guy to help his boy out. He doesn't care about your opinions about him. He's dealt with that nonsense his whole career. I've adapted a piece of dialogue from one of my favorite screenwriters, Aaron Sorkin, to show you exactly what I mean. A young Formula 1 driver lives in a world with walls, and those walls are guarded by fathers. Who's gonna do it? You, sitting at home with your remote or on your phone? Jos Verstappen had a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep for young Max and curse Jos's methods. You have that luxury. You have that luxury of not knowing what Jos knew. That Max's training and Jos's role in it, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, shaped Max into what he is now. You don't want the truth, because deep down in places you don't talk about on Twitter, you know Max needed his father on that wall. We use words like honor, code and loyalty. We use these words as the backbone for a life spent trying to accomplish something. You use them as a punchline. Jos neither has the time nor the inclination to explain himself to a person who enjoys all the success Max had thanks to what Jos provided and then questions the manner in which he provided it. I would rather that you just said thank you Jos and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you train your own children and stand the post. Either way, I don't give a f*** about what you think about Jos Verstappen. Subscribe.